Good afternoon, Class 4, and welcome to our science lesson. Today we are carrying on with our unit about teeth and digestion, and today we are looking at food chains. The aim of today's lesson is for you to be able to construct and interpret food chains. And we will know if you have reached this aim if by the end of this lesson you are able to order a simple food chain, you can identify the producer, the predator and the prey, and you can interpret a variety of food chains. So, what is a food chain? Is this a word and a phrase that you have heard before? Have you studied it before? Have you seen it in a film clip or in a book? Do you think you might have a little idea about what a food chain is but are not quite sure? Okay, I want you to jot down your ideas about what a food chain is in your book, or if you want to, tell a grown-up. So now we're going to watch a video clip, and at the end of it, we're going to see if you can add to your ideas about what a food chain is. So, can you add to your ideas? Did you find out anything else? So now we're going to think about interpreting food chains. So look at this food chain on our screen. It starts with some grass, then it moves on to the slug, and then the frog, and then the owl. How is it constructed? What do you think the arrows represent? Why have they got arrows in between the grass and the slug, then the slug and the frog, and then the frog and the owl? Do you think that's showing us in which order they're eaten? Which way the food chain goes, where it starts and where it ends? And how should we label the different parts of the food chain? Well, we're going to move on now and we're going to think about the vocabulary for the different parts of the food chain. And then we're going to have a go at making our own food chains and labelling them. So, some of the words that we are going to need when we're interpreting food chains. So, a herbivore, we know that from last week, there's an animal that eats plants. Carnivores, an animal that eats other animals. An omnivore, an animal that eats plants and animals. A detrivore, an animal that eats decomposing plants and animals. Now, we didn't study that last week, but a detrivore is an animal that eats decomposing plants and animals, like a slug. That's a really good example, is a slug. Producers and autotrophs are plants that have produced their own food. Consumers, animals that eat plants or other animals. Primary consumer is an animal that eats plants, and the primary consumer is usually the first animal in our food chain. Secondary consumer is the second animal in our food chain, and that's an animal that eats the primary consumer. A tertiary consumer is an animal that eats the secondary consumer, so the third animal in our food chain. Prey is an animal that is hunted for food. A scavenger is an animal that eats dead animals. So think about some of those maybe video clips we've seen about safaris or in the wild. There's animals that go over when another animal's being killed and feed off it. I'm thinking of hyenas, those kind of animals. Predators, an animal that kills for food. And decomposer, an organism or bacteria that breaks down dead plants and animals into liquid for food. So we go back to our food chain and we're going to have a go at labelling it. So we started with the grass, and that's the producer, the autotroph. And then we move on to the slug, and the slug is a consumer because it eats the grass. And it's the primary consumer in this food chain because it's the first animal. And we can also describe it as being prey because it's preyed on by the frog, it's eaten by the frog. And it's actually a detrivore because a slug will eat decomposing food and animals. So the next part of our food chain, again, is a consumer because it's eating the animal, but it's a secondary consumer this time because it's eating the slug. And the frog can be described as being a predator because it eats the slug, but also it's prey because it's eaten by the owl. And a frog is an omnivore, and an omnivore, as we know, is an animal that eats plants and animals. The next animal in our food chain, again, is a consumer, and this time it's a tertiary consumer. It's a third consumer in this food chain, and it's the owl, and it's a predator, it's preying on the frog. And an owl is a carnivore because it eats other animals. So what you're going to do this afternoon for your task is you have got some food chain sorting cards, and I want you to create a food chain. Okay, have a go at maybe just cutting them out and having a go at ordering them and making a food chain. So think about what's your producer, what's your primary consumer, your secondary consumer, and your tertiary consumer. So create a food chain. Maybe you want to take a photograph of it or stick it in your book and label it with those terms. Go back in this video if you need to have a look and see what they are. So that's the first thing I want you to do. If you're feeling adventurous or you want to do a little bit more, then have a look at our food chain challenge cards. And there's some food chains that you need to construct, and there's certain criteria, some clear instructions about what you have to do. Okay, good luck, try hard, and I look forward to seeing your work.